not level, by the way.
Oh, it's not?
So.
I didn't do it. Yeah. Oh.
Okay, there's a little leveler over here. Yeah. I'm gonna get something from my car quickly to make this a little heavier.
Okay.
Schmuck. Are you
You could use a tripod. Extra shots.
Yeah, it's like it's better to have like it's actually something like logging or something. And like they know. Because like when I can really well, I just feel like it's awkward if like we go out filming in Mill Valley and like, and then
I don't. I don't really know what we should. Is what mine?
this bag.
Yeah. One of them is mine. The smaller one's mine.
Here's your tripod. We don't need it anymore. Or maybe?
We can also put this camera on it.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna buy.
Okay.
Is this your mic? No, this is my mic.
Alright, I just filmed a bunch of random movements around the sign. Hopefully that's good.
It's okay. Okay.
We lost you. Slow it down. Look. It's also tilting sort of forward. Alright, here, do you want to do it?
Yeah,
Get some
sure.
shot?
Okay. So let's do
Yeah, we should definitely get.
How's Hanukkah going?
Alright. It's the last night.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Cool. Want me to camera next to it?
Yeah, no, I was thinking more of a following it up. So walk.
Do you want to do it?
Sure.
It's recording.
Okay.
I mean, it's just gonna be better.
I mean, not by much. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, now we go.
Yeah.
See what you mean. Oh wait, well then I'll just... I can't keep it still. It's so wobbly. Wait, can you... Here. Okay, whatever. Sure. Thanks.
That's sort of cool.
Where? What's
Yeah,
cool?
like the line of branches.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to like walk down.
Okay. Oh, this is so hard. I can't keep it still. Okay.
You can also just get some like slow shots of the rocks, which
Let's
could be
do
cool.
that. Let's just walk over here.
Oh. Oh, there we go. Okay, do you want to go walk across it? Okay. That was so shaky.
You know what would be cool? What? If we have like a... Alright.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
Yeah, that'll work. Okay, so... An Alex shot.
Alex, look off into the distance.
Yeah.
Like, be like amazed by nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like this.
Great. Okay,
Oh, that, wait, that
should we do
has
like...
sort of a cool effect.
Should we do like...
Nope. Yeah, okay. That didn't work.
Oh, what?
Is it still going up? Nope. This isn't it.
Ooh, it's that red.
That's probably good. One of the vines that like
Ew, that's
suffocate
so gross.
trees.
I don't like that. It's like Stranger Things, like when they. Okay.
That's not
Wait, how do
gonna-
you focus?
Yeah,
we
that's
have to
not
come
gonna-
close to it.
You have to get like super close. It's for. Then-
It's recording now.
All right. Do we want to?
No? Yeah, that looks good. Wait, keep going.
That's gonna look a little weird. Yeah. Okay, that was way too much. My thumb was in. Yeah, those. I'm sorry, I'm not. Yeah, sure.
Okay, ready?
It's a little. Here, I should probably be closer to you.
Oh, are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Yeah, mine don't match.
Alright.
Okay, ready? Go.
Yeah.
Okay.
That probably was horrible. Because I. Alright. And go. Alright. We probably have at least a second out of there.
Yeah, and then it said it was like.
Now it is.
Yeah.
Okay, wait. Ooh.
Yeah, so hold it with 2 fingers on the bottom just to slightly stabilize
Yeah.
it.
Oh. Is this, no.
See, it's hard.
This
to
is
do.
really hard. Is this actually more stable than using your hands?
Oh yeah, no, it's a lot. If you know how to use it, you can get like. People use
Ooh.
See, doesn't that look nice? If you're
Yeah.
like holding it still. People use like there's those electronic dollies or whatever, like
Yeah.
gimbals. People usually like professional people use these over those.
I mean, like, are you able to zoom in while you're recording?
No,
Oh,
because that'll make it all shaky.
right.
But
I wanna, can we, wait, hold on. I wanna stop this.
Here.
Stop.
I don't know. It's- Yeah, that's not. If you got it on. Yeah. Yeah, like here, wait. We can get a quick shot with this.
Yeah. Why don't you drink out of there?
Oh my god. I'll give you $5 if you duck your head in.
That's not enough.
Yeah, I need like 100.
Yeah. I would do it. I would do it for 100.
I would do it for 100. I take a shower.
Maybe 50.
Yeah. Desperate time.
Really.
You know what's in the world.
Yeah, man.
So, I mean, you'll just wash off afterwards.
Exactly.
Okay, this is so hard to use. Okay.
This place is actually really cool. I'm
Yeah.
gonna come here.
Yeah. Oh my god, look at that house.
This
That's
is my new
insane.
spot. Oh my god.
Okay. This just won't stay still.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm just doing it wrong. Like, I feel like
what are
I
you trying
should.
to get?
I'm just trying to, you know, I'm going like panning like that, except it's like shaking so much, and maybe I'm just like not strong enough. Wait,
Here, what if we like?
Can you do it again, but like slower?
Yeah.
It's for horses.
No, but like it's so small and it's just a circle. It's not even like stable.
I feel like I give it.
Oh. Let's go.
End of that was.
Name?
Oh, Monty.
Oh, no, Natalia bird is like.
Wait, not yet. And action. Okay, it's also like it's. And I'm just gonna. Sorry. whatever. Do you guys have any ideas for other shots? Or? Because I don't want to feel like I'm doing all of the... If you guys want to use this at all, but...
I don't really have any ideas.
Okay. I mean, not gay.
Yeah. And then like final two, you have to put like all of them together into like one.
How long do they each have to be?
Like a page. Yeah.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not that bad.
So it's just like happy, like
Yeah. So maybe,
nature.
like in January we can film again.
In a city, certainly in a place like Marin, we can listen to the birds, we can be attentive to other wildlife, we can pay attention to the weather, and not get so self-conditioned by being outdoors, not be so dependent on electricity. Realize that there's a world out there that isn't determined by human beings, and we can appreciate that when we look at a sunset. For example, we realize that there's a world of beauty way beyond our reach that we can appreciate if we're receptive to it.
That was so nice. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, so we're recording now. So, do you want to ask the questions?
Yeah. Okay. So, what is your name and what is your role on the Fairfax Open Space Committee?
My name is Ruth Horn, and my role is as a member, and Michael always puts me down as a co-secretary. I've been on the committee since it was formed in July 2004, and that was a promise of a council person who's now on the water board, Larry Bragman. And we had 11 members when we started. We're now down to 9 because it's a little hard to get everybody out to be a quorum. And let's see, our mission, we want to save open space for the next generation. I can't remember the exact words that we
Can you look at
put
her
down.
when you talk?
Look at her.
Yeah.
Well, let's have like a set, like, place where she's looking. Do you want to?
Well, at me.
Yeah.
I think her hair looks pretty good.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, should we listen, play back the audio before we, okay, sorry, we just.
I don't know about the Open Space Committee, I know about Open Minds.
Great, okay, so do you want to start with the questions?
Okay. So, can you please introduce yourself and tell us about the film we're seeing tonight?
All right, I'm.
Looking at
You
her.
might want to close the door.
There's not a door.
Oh, there's no
Do
door.
this, so it is kind of loud. I mean, hopefully it'll be okay.
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 And how are you, Mikey? Is that Mike?
Yes, we don't have a lavalier.
Okay. All right, I'm Stephen Most.
Can you look at me?
Yes, I'm Stephen Most. I'm the writer-producer of Wilder Than Wild. It's a film that began right after the Rim Fire in 2013. I've made other films on similar subjects. I made a film about fire and forest ecology. I made a film about one of the greatest conservationists of the 20th century, Aldo Leopold, and also a 2-hour history of the Forest Service. So this whole subject of wildland fires is something I'm familiar with. But one of my colleagues with whom I've worked on films before told me to take a close look at the Rim Fire because wildfires have become different in this century. And he thought that the Rim Fire exemplified that. That is the mega fire, the wildfire of 100,000 acres and more. And I thought that would make a good subject for a film because the Rim Fire burned part of Yosemite, which everybody knows, and it also affected the Tuolumne River drainage, and that's the source of water for San Francisco. in much of the Bay Area. So I figured an urban audience would find this wildfire in a forest of interest. Well, what I discovered is that these wildfires are getting worse in terms of burning more area at higher rate of severity. And in the 4 years that Director Kevin White and I made this film, we saw wildfires become larger, more powerful, more destructive.
And what motivates you to make these kinds of documentaries?
Making documentaries is a great way to learn stuff. When I'm a playwright and I've done some reporting, and I find that when I'm with the film crew, I can meet almost anyone, go anywhere, ask all sorts of questions. So if I really want to find out about something, making a film is a good way to do it. The downside, though, is that it takes a lot of time. You have to raise a lot of money. It's a big deal to make a documentary film. But I learned so much. I can talk to everyone who knows anything about the subject that concerns me. And then I try to create a synthesis of that for the audience.
And after deciding on a topic to focus on, what's your process of coming up with the story in order to convey your message?
That's a great question. And in fact, I wrote a book about the process of finding a subject in the world and turning it into a story for an audience. The book is called Stories Make the World. It came out last year. And so it varies. One variable is whether the events of the story have all happened already. Because then maybe you can read books or go to the place where it happened, interview everybody who knows everything about it, and you can actually script a film like that in advance. And then, you'll be using mainly archival footage. It's very different when you're covering something that's changing. Then it's hard to figure out, well, who are the people to follow? Where do you need to go? What's important? How are we going to end this thing? Because a film needs a beginning, middle, and end. There are all of these questions that have to be resolved in order to make that subject into a story.
And your film focuses on climate change, so what do you think are simple changes in Americans' lifestyles that can make the most environmental impact?
There are simple changes and also very complex changes that we need to make in order to address the challenge of climate change. A lot of people have been making the simple changes. People are using less gasoline, going to hybrids, all electric vehicles, changing light bulbs. There are all sorts of things, walking more. There are all sorts of things that an individual can do. But the real changes have to occur on a larger level. For example, and actually they're to our benefit, the wine country wildfires last October are a case in point. 17 fires broke out one Sunday night after 10 o'clock. That's in the film, you'll see. This all happened because of heavy winds knocking down power lines, which caused sparks that ignited fuel. So that's why you had 17 fires ignite almost simultaneously. Well, having these transmission lines going through vegetated areas is not a great idea. We can get our electricity in a much more decentralized way, which would be much less expensive and much more resilient in cases of emergency and shortage. So that's a large-scale change, but it's one that we need to make eventually.
And we're at the point where more people are acknowledging climate change. Do you think awareness will motivate people to make a difference, or do you think that more environmental regulations need to be put in place in order to make that impact?
I think what will make an impact is increased public awareness due to disasters. That's really unfortunate, but things have to really get bad for people to act. And these are changes that need to be made at many scales. We have both an economic system and a governmental system that has a short-term focus. Members of Congress have 2 years to do something. Corporations make quarterly reports. They want to show results to their investors on the short term. But what we have to do is make investments now with a very long-term prospect in mind. And that involves transportation systems, it involves what we do with lands, what we plant, how we build our houses. Really large-scale changes in our entire society as well as with individual lives. And few people are willing to make that investment for the long term when they're paying the costs right now.
All right, 1 second. This battery is about to die.
Oh.
Can we use yours? This is Josh. He just showed up. He's a member of our group. Can we put your camera on here?
The camera has a battery, but it's a different battery, so you have to.
Okay.
The vision of the Fairfax Open Space Committee is to ensure that open space that is undeveloped currently, and the wildlife therein and the other flora and fauna therein are protected and preserved for the benefit of Fairfax residents and Marin at large.
And why do you think this organization is important for our community and the world?
Oh, snap. That's a good question. Important for the community because, oftentimes we take for granted the fact that we have so much open space, and there were so many people that came before us whose shoulders we stand on that had fought and advocated for the preservation of this open space and the conservation of this open space. And so this organization is in line with that movement, that historical trajectory. And so we're just trying to honor that legacy and make sure that we can uphold those same values and protect this open space. And then, from a global perspective, there's so much open space that needs to be protected, but every bit that we can protect, it's cumulative, so it all adds up to a better environment overall. Yeah.
And how can people help and support the Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Few ways that people could help. One way would be to just spread the word about its existence. So, this is a public board and people can come and share how they feel about open space, what they want to see protected, what trails they want to see preserved or restored and things like that. And also, in that same vein, the volunteer opportunities are immense, especially, tonight there's a wildfire film, and we often talk about French broom at our open space meetings and the need to have people go out and pick the French broom and stuff like that, because you really need to pull it out by its roots. And that's pretty big fire fuel in this part of Marin County. And so those opportunities are necessary. We need bodies on the ground, and so that's important. And then donating is also another big function that the public could play, because it's kind of tough raising a lot of money to buy expensive pieces of property here in Marin, and there are plenty of instances of people that have wanted to do that and didn't have the cash to do it, and somebody else scooped it up and developed it or subdivided it. So those are a few things.
I have one more question. Susan was telling us how the Fairfax Open Space Committee partners with other organizations. Could you tell us more about that?
Sure. So one of our main partners in the town of Fairfax is... One of the main partners in the town of Fairfax is the volunteer board, which actually does a lot of the trail maintenance work. And so there's a lot of inter-commission, inter-board work that happens within the town between different citizens that are giving themselves to public service and volunteer opportunities for the betterment of the town. And then the other big partner we have is the San Anselmo Open Space Committee, which we partner with to acquire pieces of property that we share within the Fairfax San Anselmo Open Space area, and then Marin County Parks and Open Space, as well as the One Tamalpais Collaborative, which are all agencies or interagency collaborative groups that are working to find ways to preserve wildlife, learn more about wildlife, learn more about the hydrology of the ecosystem, as well as figure out how can we preserve this for the betterment of hikers and bikers and equestrians and the public at large.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Okay. What is your name?
Georgia Little? What's his name? Sorry.
Say my name.
Okay. Oh, what?
Say my name.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, should we?
We're not gonna really be able to hear you with them talking in the back. So should we wait? Like,
Yeah, we should.
Am I supposed to say something? Like, tell them?
no, that's not what I mean. I mean, like,
Oh.
should we just wait until they're?
Oh, they're waiting for you.
Oh.
Oh, can I show you? Tell me quiet.
Or
ask
say,
them,
like,
ask
ask them to like keep it down a little.
No, that's so. Just don't.
Wait, but do you guys want to film them? Because that's why they're waiting.
Yes.
Yeah, we're
but, like,
interviewing
I'm
them.
just saying
Okay,
that
well then,
it's-
yeah.
Ask them to.
Alex.
This
You
is
should,
kinda
you should go.
loud.
You should go.
Yeah, you should.
Me?
You like know them?
I've been to like. Okay, my name is Georgia Little.
And what's your role on the Fairfax Open Space Committee?
My role on the Open Space Committee is that I am a youth member on the coalition.
What's the mission of FOSS?
To make sure and keep like Fairfax as green as possible, as many open spaces open to the community, and make sure that like it doesn't fill up with all the housing because there's so much beautiful space around.
What are specific things that you guys do?
Well, there's like anything from like fundraising events. So like we did the Biketoberfest and we raised money, and then also like something that's going on right now is the space where Cascade Canyon used to be. We're speaking with the owners and talking about what's going to happen with the land, and we kind of like ask and see if they want to donate the land or we can buy it off of them.
What do you like about being a part of the committee?
I like being part of the committee. It's really cool to see like what a committee is even like. I honestly had no idea. It's like pretty formal. They like ask like to motion something and then people have to second it and then agree and then ask if people don't agree. So it's really cool just in general to see how a committee works in a town. And then I also like the mission of it and preserving Fairfax because I've lived here my whole life.
What is the committee currently in the process of doing now?
Well, like I said, the space by Cascade Canyon, they're trying to get land from that project.
How has the committee impacted Fairfax and surrounding communities?
Well, in many ways, just making sure to have land, there's trails, lots of broom poles. I don't know if you got any video of the meeting, but that like we're planned a broom pole for February 2nd, so like there's broom poles all the time.
Why should we protect undeveloped land?
We should protect the land because otherwise there's going to be housing and then you lose the beautiful nature of our town, which is amazing and so green.
How can the general public help Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Simple ways of like donating, even just being on our mailing list, you'll hear all the different announcements of ways that they can participate, and even like we have a spot open now, and then also I'm going to graduate, so becoming a youth member even if you're a high schooler.
Where does most of the money come from for Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Donations.
How does the committee decide which land to protect?
It's just we talk about like new land. If anybody hears about it through the town, everything has to go through us. So like they hear about it through the town or also like announcements.
And do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
If you're youth and you want to be a part of this next year, then contact me.
Why did you join?
I joined really because I just wanted to know what a committee was like. I mean, I had no idea what it was going to be like, and it's been a cool experience to see how a town even works that I really had no idea, and going to even like town meetings.
Do you have any specific stories of how the Fairfax Open Space Committee impacted someone's life? Totally fine if you don't. Just
No.
Okay.
Okay, well that's all we have, so
Okay,
thank you.
cool.
Okay, ready? Are you recording?
Mhm.
Okay, me too. So you want to start?
All right, and you can just look at me. So to start, what's your name and role on Fairfax Open Space Committee?
My name is Charles Cornwell, and I am the treasurer and I'm also on the stewardship subcommittee.
What is the mission of Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Ooh, to promote the preservation and stewardship of open space in the town of Fairfax.
What are specific things that you guys do?
Well, we, I think our major goal is to fundraise for specific projects. When a parcel of land of interest comes up for sale, and define what parcels we're interested in. The most interesting parcels to our committee are parcels that are contiguous to existing open space, like the watershed or Loma Alta open space.
What do you like about being a part of the committee?
I personally feel like I have a certain duty to be on this type of committee because I've enjoyed the open space for my whole life. I grew up in Sleepy Hollow, so I feel like it's a way to give back, appropriate way to give back, to ensure that kids can enjoy the open space the way that I did in my childhood.
What is the committee currently in the process of doing now?
Right now, I would say we're always fundraising. Right now, it's a bit unclear what the next target property is going to be. I know before I joined the committee, it was Sky Ranch, and they raised a couple $1 million for that. I think there needs to be a piece of land that generates excitement within the community, and then the committee will go into action at that point.
How has the committee impacted Fairfax and surrounding communities?
I think it's a committee that needs to be there to organize community members that aren't necessarily used to being organized for fundraising. It brings people together to reach a goal, and it can bring grants in to assist the community in reaching that goal. So without it, you don't have that institutional knowledge to get it done.
Why should we protect undeveloped land?
I think we should protect undeveloped land because I think in order to I would say primarily for health reasons, like to I think it's becoming known currently that living in a city impacts your health negatively. You know, air pollution, noise pollution. There's all sorts of things that just now we're able to measure and study. And living in a suburban community or like a whatever you want to call Fairfax, something of a mix of open space and housing, I think there's benefits that we don't even know about.
How can the general public help Fairfax Open Space Committee?
I would say by being aware of what's going on, by certainly by donating money, by using the open space as recreationally, it becomes a bigger part of people's lives. So then they're more likely to donate. They have more money from not doing other things like going to the mall, and I think I would say those are the reasons.
How does the committee decide which land to protect?
Well, like I said before, one of the biggest criteria is being contiguous with existing open space, so that you don't have small little lots that are isolated and become problems. You know, whether it's like garbage accumulating in them, or they can be more easily managed if they're contiguous and it's better hiking. It's better longer hikes.
And do you have any final thoughts you would like to share?
I would just say that for anyone that's in high school, getting involved with government is more important than ever in this age when it seems like we're kind of powerless to federal and state control. Being part of government, you'd be surprised how much of a power vacuum there is on the local level, how much is decided on the local level, whether it's how big the fire department should be. I just read an article today about towns having, different numbers of firemen for fire engines, and that's a decision the town council makes, and that's something that if we can have better town councilors, more competent community members running for election, all the better.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Okay. So to start, what is your name and your role on Fairfax Open Space Committee?
So my name is Jack Judkins, and I am at the moment the acting chair.
What is the mission of Fairfax Open Space Committee?
The mission is to protect, preserve, and identify for future protection open space properties of interest to the community. I mean, the Open Space Committee was started because people realized that although Fairfax seemingly has a lot of open space, a lot of what appears to be open space is not actually protected in any way. It's privately held land that can be developed, and in fact recently we are starting to see more development occurring in some lands that most people probably think of as protected open space.
What are specific things that you guys do?
The things that I'm most interested in that we've accomplished are acquiring properties, although to acquire property requires a fair amount of money, as I'm sure you understand. And so we haven't been able to...
We're gonna have to stop.
What happened?
No worries.
My car got full. I'm gonna just get that phone back.
Really?
Wait, it's already full? Did you just put a new
No, I
one
put
in?
my own back in because I was like, I wanna like.
Yeah, well.
I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
That's right. Oh, okay. I have like a larger one.
Good. All right, so let's do this. What do you like about being a part of the committee?
I like the people who are working on the committee. I particularly like recently we've gotten a lot of younger members who have a lot of energy and great ideas and really just kind of set out to accomplish something. For example, we've had a film night as a way of introducing ourselves to the community and bringing issues through documentary films to the town of Fairfax. And this young woman just like literally just put together the program, picked a film, got a group of people to be a panel, and it's not a major fundraising event, but it was a really fun, interesting event that got like 30 or 40 people out on a Thursday night. So I really like working with the people, and of course I like the mission of the organization. It's a hard and slow process to try to actually protect land that is held privately, and we've had successes and we've had some failures, but I really appreciate that there are people concerned about trying to preserve the things that most of us who live in this town really appreciate.
What is the committee currently in the process of doing now?
Some of our big projects, as I said, we have a film night, so we're going to continue with that. Some of our projects involve proposed development. There's this, what we refer to as the wall property, which is now called the Morinda Heights development. and we're involved in seeking to ensure that the open space values associated with that property are respected, whether or not the property gets developed.
How has the committee impacted Fairfax and surrounding communities?
I think, as I said before, we have been able to make a couple small purchases of property. So we've added to the open space that's protected into perpetuity forever. We've also worked with the town of San Anselmo and the Marin Open Space Trust to preserve a larger piece of property. We've helped do stewardship on existing properties, things like broom pulls. So I think we've had a positive impact, although we're just a bunch of volunteers doing this in our spare time.
Why should we protect undeveloped land?
Well, it serves to affect our health as well. It gives us places where we can be in and appreciate nature. It protects our watershed and the waters within the watersheds. It protects wildlife, and I know that, you know, prevailing thought maybe in this country is that wildlife is something that, you know, should only exist in small areas, but really it has a central role in the ecology that all of us are part of. So I think those are the most important things.
How can the general public help Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Participate in the attempts to develop property, become involved and engaged in the planning commission and the town councils, dealing with applications to develop, contribute to the acquisition of lands, set aside land if they have extra land as open space. Whether or not it's private or public, that's always a great thing to do. And get involved, you know.
How does the committee decide which land to protect?
We actually, I don't know, about, I guess 5 or 10 years ago, we put together a process. We analyzed and created an assessment by which we can look at properties and decide what values it has that may or may not make it more or less desirable to retain as open space. So some of those things include natural habitat, recreational opportunities, cultural resources, view sheds, particularly important visual areas. So we do have like this set criteria that we can use to apply to properties, and one of our responsibilities over time is to, under the general plan, is to assess potential open space properties and to create a priority list.
And do you have any final thoughts you would like to share?
Yeah, like I'm really excited that we have a youth member, and I hope that more people from the Drake community will become involved and participate with our committee and come out to our events.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
We have one more question, which
Sure.
I understand if you don't have an answer to this, but do you have any stories of somebody whose life was directly impacted by the Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Yeah, like my kids. So one of them is really concerned about environmental issues, and I think that has everything to do with the fact that he grew up in Fairfax, that he did a lot of hiking and spent a lot of time out in nature here, and he still does that. My older son, although you know environmental protection is maybe not his number one priority, also has a deep connection to nature and enjoys and participates in that. So those are two very close examples of how I think it's had a really positive effect on them.
Cool, thank you. That's all.
I have one more question. Why do you think like individuals connecting with nature? Why do you think that's important?
For me, I'm not a religious person, So for me, to me, nature is my spirituality. To the extent that I am spiritual, that is where I feel, this profound sense of maybe peace or awe at the splendor of nature. I know that sounds trite, but really I do. That's really where I feel any sort of spiritual belief is out in nature. And I also love to be out there for the physical part of it too. So
Great. Well, thank you so much.
sure. Well, it's really helpful. I'm looking forward to March 1st. So
Yeah, it's going to be at the Drake Little Theater.
Second.
Saying that. That looks really good.
Yeah.
Okay, ready? Okay.
Okay. So to start, what is your name and your role on Fairfax Open Space Committee?
My name is Susan Pascal Moran, and I am a committee member of the Fairfax Open Space.
What is the mission of Fairfax Open Space Committee?
We're to try to preserve the open space and create a sustainable, balanced nature in relationship to our building and our development.
What are specific things that you guys do?
We do, well, you just heard broom pull, which is one of my most feared things, because I have a tricky back. But we do a lot of different things. Mainly we acquire land, and so in order to acquire land to preserve that open space, we do a lot of events, like we do the open, we do a film night, we do different events. We'll do Give Back Tuesday at Iron Springs, just like a lot of your local community things. And so,
what do you like about being a part of the committee?
I feel like I'm making a difference. I feel like I'm really helping to preserve what is important to this area and the reason that I moved here, which is the nature.
What is the committee currently in the process of doing now?
We've just finished a letter to the town advising them about a development which is proposed for and has been submitted for, you might have heard about it, the wall property. It's now called Miranda Heights Development, but it's on a very, very steep ridge line, and it can create a lot of erosion, slides, and dangerous situations, as well as cutting off the wildlife corridor and really impacting the wildlife.
How has the committee impacted Fairfax and surrounding communities?
Well, we've sort of grown, we've sort of been spawned, as it were, by the San Anselmo Open Space. And so we work in tandem with them and other open space communities and organizations that work to preserve the nature in this area. And so just think of it, I mean, we're nothing like the East Bay, we're nothing like the rest of the Bay Area or even a lot of California. It's really special. We've helped preserve the quintessential nature of this area.
Why should we protect undeveloped land?
It's not just undeveloped land, it's land that has significant ecological value. Land that is used as habitat for species, because that allows the species to thrive and grow. It also creates recreational opportunities. I mean, there would not be mountain biking without this beautiful mountain watershed. You wouldn't have that escape from urban life and roads and cars. It's a treasure.
How can the general public help Fairfax Open Space Committee?
Oh, volunteer, come on board, help us do things. Donate your time, donate your enthusiasm. We are blessed. I always often think of what JFK said was, to those whom much is given, much will be expected. So we have a role, a responsibility. It's an honor, actually, to be the stewards of this land. So please be a part of us in whatever way you can.
How does the committee decide which land to protect?
It's what comes available, and it's also what is adjacent to open space, and we do evaluate, you know, what the importance of different parcels of land are. I mean, if it's sort of like stuck in between a bunch of houses, it's not as important as something that's articulating with open space and that coyotes might want to, you know, cross, and deer and so forth.
Do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I'm really hoping that the students get involved, because you are the future, and it's really important that you continue this labor of love, and I know you will, because the kids nowadays are amazing. I'm lucky to have raised one, and I'm so impressed by everybody.
Do you have any specific stories of how the Fairfax Open Space Committee has impacted someone's life?
Specifically, my stories I bring to this place are of the hawks and the peregrine falcons, and I live adjacent to Loma Alta, which is there because of the Open Space Committee, and I've just seen the most amazing birds and interactions and wildlife, and I know that wouldn't be there without people like that have come before me and who will continue after me.
Well,
yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, and we'll try and set up an interview up in the open space sometime.
Maybe just by general introductions and getting ourselves oriented and getting the crowd familiar with who you are. Maybe everyone could go down the line and say who you are, what your title is, and how your work has related to fire or involves fire, or what inspired you to get into your line of work.
Well, I'm Stephen Lois, the writer-producer of the film you just saw, and made a number of films on related issues. A film about the great conservationist Alan Leopold. I made a film with Malcolm North about fire and forest health. And the more I learned about wildfires, the more I realized that this film needed to be made.
I'm Mia Kretz. At work, I'm the head of early care and education at a company called Wonder School, and I live in Fairfax in the Deer Park neighborhood, tucked way back in the corner, where I worry a lot about fire and getting stuck, evacuation, overgrowth, community, not knowing neighbors, and this summer I was home with my newborn, and I was seeing other neighborhoods with signs about evacuation preparedness meetings and fire meetings, and I was like, okay, Deer Park, like, when's this gonna happen? And then I was like, oh, maybe I should do something instead of just thinking about it. And so I organized a fire prep and evacuation walk with Todd Lando, who's like a local celebrity fire guy. And then our neighborhood decided to become a FireWise neighborhood, so we're in the process of getting certified.
Hi, I'm Mike Swayze. I'm the watershed manager for Marin Municipal Water District, and I'm also on the board of directors of Fire Safe Marin. That's kind of a consortium of land managers and fire service professionals and neighborhood groups seeking to reduce the risk of wildfire and educate people about how they can protect their community. And Todd's our coordinator and does great work. I've got a master's degree in fire ecology, and I studied forestry at Berkeley, so these issues are something that I've learned about and been aware of since back in the 70s and 80s, and now with climate change, you know, the peril is so much greater. And so I want to congratulate your filmmaking for, it's deeply saddening, but it also kind of lets us know of the work that's ahead. And I congratulate you. I'm a Deer Park neighbor as well.
I'm Jay Roberts. I'm an ecologist with the Sierra Group at Point Blue Conservation Science in Petaluma. And a lot of the work that I do is monitoring for the Forest Service. And what monitoring means is things like counting animals to find out what state the forests are in, address questions like what the response of wildlife and biodiversity is following disturbances like fire.
I'm Paul Mason. I'm the Vice President for Policy and Incentives at Pacific Forest Trust. I work in Sacramento and am functionally a lobbyist for forests and watersheds. Have been for the last 15 years or so there, the last 10 with Pacific Forest Trust. Before that, I lobbied for the Sierra Club for a number of years. Prior to that, I did a lot of tree hugging work up on the North Coast and sort of save the last ancient redwoods sort of stuff. And it's really interesting and sobering how much the whole conversation around forest issues, forest ecology, restoration has evolved over that time period. 20 years ago we weren't talking about the impacts of climate change, and now it's very obviously the dominant issue we're dealing with.
Well, I think that's a great segue into kind of my first question, and feel free to kind of jump in, everybody. We don't have to be quite so formal and have everyone speak. I'd like to make this more of kind of a conversation for everyone. So I was just wondering, kind of, in your experience and in your lifetime, how have you seen fire regimes change? And then how have you seen people respond to those regimes, maybe both on a personal and professional level?
Well, I'm happy to jump in. I think it's really interesting, or that's not really quite the right word, but the situation that we've gotten ourselves into is entirely of our own making. It's entirely from past logging and fire suppression policy, where we have taken what was formerly a really diverse forest, more broadly spaced trees, more large trees, more openings, and have created this scenario where it's, generally speaking, broad sweeping oversimplification here, but it's generally speaking much, much too dense and a lot of much smaller trees than were there historically. And so the fire behavior there is just entirely different than it would have been under a more natural scenario. And it's sort of like if you built a campfire of a whole bunch of really dense, small twigs. It burns very differently than if you just put a couple of bigger logs in there and throw a match on it. It's just an entirely different phenomenon. And even over the last 20, 25 years, we've really seen everything get worse, because the trees that were, this big 20 years ago are this big now, and all we've done is prevent fire from doing anything to make the landscape more diverse. And it's just all the same age across huge swaths, and fires get really, really big under those scenarios.
I think at a community member level, there's some movement and opportunity for a lot more to move from being a passive community member to being more actively engaged and sort of creating your own defensible community and defensible space, and being a participant and making sure your neighborhood is as fire protected as possible, instead of just waiting for it to happen.
And I think the movie did a really good job of describing how people's understanding of fires has changed over time. We're starting with the Smoky Bear. Fire's always bad, and now we've arrived at a point where we understand pretty well that fire is a really important part of ecology. And most of the western United States is adapted to fire, and the natural areas are the forests and shrublands. And a lot of those areas are really fire dependent, in fact. So trying to shift sort of our, total understanding from the entire community and all the people that live in the region, going through this evolution to where we are now, I think is really encouraging. But there's still a long way to go. There's a lot of nuance in fire. This is the thing that I sort of struggle with trying to explain the science behind fire a lot, because nuance is everything. I mean, it all depends on exactly what you're talking about, what area you're in, etc. And it goes on and on and on. So get into some of those details if you like.
Just to follow up on that idea, we all live in the shadow of Mount Tam here, and Mount Tam is this diverse environment, and how fire behaved in historic times and prehistoric times before Europeans came was different depending on the vegetation type. We all have this model of the Sierra Nevada, which is an extensive mountain range where, as John Muir says, we could ride a horse through. But fire didn't always behave in that, every vegetation type in the same way. For instance, Chaparral, which we have on Mount Tam, has even in the pre-European times, it has more of a longer fire history, fire return interval. And when the fire passed through Chaparral, it didn't create park-like conditions. It burnt everything to the ground, and then it regenerates. And so, I think one of the things that we're learning is on the coast, where we have this notion that we have this moist air. It's not as flammable. I think there's greater recognition that we have similar kinds of conditions in our forest that in the Sierra Nevada. For instance, from fire scar analysis of old redwood forests on the old trees, we know before European times, Native Americans on Bolinas Ridge on the shoulder of Mount Tam burned so frequently that the fire scar analysis shows that fire came back between every 8 and 13 years over hundreds of years where we have that fire record. So that maintained that open forest similar to the Sierra Nevada. And so along came Europeans and we logged the redwood forest. We had a catastrophic fire in 1845 that burned over the Kent Lake Basin. We had proliferation of tan oak that came back in much denser condition than what we had in the old growth condition. And then along comes sudden oak death. So we have massive die-off. And this is now through the most of coastal California within the redwood region. So there's some recognition now that we have to invest in our coastal forests, much like we do in the Sierra Nevada, to protect those remaining large trees. So we'll get into it a little bit later, but we're doing some interesting work in redwood forests to get back and get to that fire return interval. We can't just drop a match in those woods. There's so much density that we need to do some pre-fire thinning and brush removal in order to create a condition where we can safely do fires and not damage the residual trees. So there is that new willingness to do hands-on management in parklands where in the past we thought nature could take care of it. So
I think that actually kind of is a
for starters, our thinking needs to change. What I encountered in making the film were polarized ideas about fire and a deadlock politically as a result. So, for example, a very large faction in the Forest Service is committed to the notion that wildfires are bad, they have to be stopped. This is not just an ideology, it's a huge interest group. People built their careers on being firefighters as a whole. It's like the military, you're very macho as a firefighter, but there are also huge economic interests that are vested in a kind of fire industrial complex that get congressional appropriations. So now the majority of the Forest Service's budget is dedicated to fighting fires rather than doing proactive work to clear vegetation, to do prescribed fires and so on. So that mindset has to change. Now the scientists within the Forest Service know better, but they don't have an influence on policy the way the firefighters do. And on the other side, there are people within the environmental community who have John Muir's philosophy, that fire is wild, it's natural, therefore it's good. And people talk about the benefits of snag forests that look dead to us, but there's wildlife there. So you can get into the, protect the black-backed woodpecker and let those forest fires burn. And as a result, we have lawsuits to try to prevent anything happening. And that's that deadlock that Mary Nichols talked about. We have to understand, we have to get beyond this polarized thinking and realize that fire is a tool. It's probably one of the original tools that our species had. And it's not something to be afraid of. We have to be aware also that we're using fire all the time in our industrial society, but it's hidden. It's hidden behind the plugs in our homes, within the hoods of our cars. We're using fire, but we're not really aware of it. We have to think about it out in the open as something that isn't necessarily a scary thing.
I think the polarized notion about talking about fire, that's an important thing. And I think it'd be great if everybody left here with the idea that you have to be able to separate some of the things that we saw in the movie. The words like catastrophic and disaster and really loaded language that describes how bad fires are, that really applies to like what happened in Santa Rosa wine country fires. Those were catastrophes. Lives are lost, homes are lost. But if we're talking about a fire that occurs where there are no homes and people's lives are not in danger, that's a much different thing. In those cases, I think the John Muir idea where it's a natural part of the ecosystem applies. That is definitely how it works. But even so, there were a couple quotes I think from some of the people that were talking about, for example, the Ring Fire. And they talked about them as mega fires. I think one of the quotes was, the fire is going to disrupt the web of life. And in the Ring Fire, I just don't think that's true at all. I totally disagree with that. And the landscapes are at significant risk of being destroyed by fire. And if we're talking about like where the Ring Fire occurred, I just really don't think that's true. So there's, I think, conflation. There's this idea that people's lives are at risk and so on, and all that stuff is terrible. As part of natural habitat, fire it actually does create really important and really rare habitat. Post-fire habitat is one of the most valuable resources, at least in the Sierras. A lot of the other parts of California are similar. So go home, I think, with this in mind, if you believe me, fires are not always bad. They're part of ecology and they're necessary. They threaten people's property and lives. That's what they're catastrophes.
I agree with you, but I think there's also something else that's going on in Sierra Nevada where we have this climate, the climate change driven drought and catastrophic tree mortality, unprecedented. And now with these likelihood of additional landscape fires of this severity that we haven't seen since the last ice age, we are at risk of losing our Sierra forests. So I think we're seeing that now. I think that's what many ecologists see as we're right at the cusp of that event.
Yeah, see, that's where I'll disagree, because I think there's nuance involved there. There's lots in what you said. We've never seen this high severity fire. So I think you're probably trying to say that the amount of high severity fire that wipes out all the trees is unprecedented in terms of recent history. And I don't think that's true. There's a lot of ways we can go back and forth. It's an active area of debate in the scientific community right now. And there's several things that influence it. It's the area burned per year is nowhere near now what it was, say, 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. It's definitely more than it was 50 years ago. Okay, so there's lots of this type of debate that we could have where we really have to iron down what details we're talking about. And even within the extremely high severity areas, for example, Ring Fire, somewhere between like 30 and 40% of Ring Fire burned at high severity, where all the trees died. But those areas are coming back, and they will come back as forests eventually. But it'll be slow in the patches where there's no seed source, there's no seeds that can get to the patches. So that's definitely the case. But that doesn't mean that the forest is gone. We'll never be forest. There'll probably be forest at some point. So there's a lot of details.
Actually, this is actually, I love this conversation. We can go right down the rabbit hole there. But I want to kind of bring it back around to sort of picking up kind of where the movie left off with the wine country fires and big fires down in Central Coast, the Thomas Fire. That really catalyzed active conversation in the legislature. And this is what I've been doing for years. I feel like I've had the same damn conversation 1,000 times about, not all fire is bad. We We can only choose the time of the fire, not whether we're going to have fire or not. You know, we need to be more proactive, having all the different hearings and stuff. Well, finally, the light switch went on for people this year. You burn down a few towns and have some life-shattering catastrophe, and all of a sudden people are like, yeah, we do need to do something. And there was a ton of legislative activity this year, new funding. You know, I dedicated $250 million to prescribed fire and to fuels reduction and community wildfire protection, changed the rules around prescribed fire. We've got dedicated funding for half a dozen prescribed fire crews, all to work around California over the next 5 years. You know, I have rarely, probably never, seen such a sea change. Like, you know, it's like you're walking up the hill and up the hill, or you're pushing a rock up the hill, and then you get to the top, and then all of a sudden, you're just rolling downhill to the other side, trying to make sure that you're going in the right direction. And that's kind of where state policy went this year. So I think we're going to see a huge increase in the capacity for doing a lot of these, you know, prescribed fire and other, you know, sort of forest restoration activities, with the challenge now, I think, being developing the social acceptance, making sure people are bought in on the idea that fire is an essential part of being in California. There's no scenario where you don't see fire in the landscape. You may have had phases of that earlier in your life when it was easier to suppress fire because we had less fuel in the landscape and climate change hadn't kicked us into where we are right now, but those times are gone. We only get to choose when we see the fire. Is it going to be on a hot, dry, windy summer day, or on some of the days when the fire behavior, we can actually choose what the outcomes are going to be? And so getting more proactive about being supportive of prescribed fire is going to be, I think, a really big part of the challenge. Because what happens right now is, you know, you have a small prescribed fire going someplace in the Sierra, and, you know, the Forest Service or the CAL FIRE or whoever starts getting the angry phone calls from people who don't like to see any smoke in the air. Well, we're going to see smoke, but there's no alternative to that. We can only choose when.
Yeah, today's a good example.
Yeah. And on a really local level, I think becoming involved as a community, being proactive, being prepared. So I live in Deer Park, which is, what's the word, eclectic probably is a really nice word for it. And that's like one of the things that we really liked about it when we moved in, but now like just getting educated about fire danger, overgrowth, undergrowth, fuel loads, etc. I think that there's respectfully a lot of neglect in our neighborhood, where educating our neighbors on how to protect their property and how to protect themselves and each other, and drawing down funding if the legislature is getting more involved, that's great. Like I would like funding in our neighborhood to get goats to eat up some of, you know, gobble up some of the overgrowth, or to help fund, you know, we do chipper days, but like we've learned from other Firewise communities that maybe you can get a truck to drive around and pick up clippings from people's yards and take it to the chipper instead of them having to haul it down. So maybe you get more participation that way. And then just like really being prepared. One of my really good friends lives in a suburb of LA and texted me like 10 minutes before I came here, and she said, I'm freaking out. I'm on a plane coming home from DC, and my husband and she has a 5-year-old and a baby. They're under voluntary evacuation for a fire that just popped up like this evening in their neighborhood. And I was like, well, is Matt organized? Does he know what to do? And she was like, no, we have earthquake kits. We don't know what to do about fire. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to text you a list. Tell him to spend 20 minutes, like really focused, pack your shit up and go. Like don't mess around with anything else. Don't wait till the last minute, get your babies in the car and peace out. Like we hear so much about traffic and don't get out of your car. That's another thing I learned recently. So I think just like knowing what to do if, and I would like to see prescribed burns because I live right at the bottom of Mount Tan, and I'm terrified that if fire comes there, like I don't know which way the wind's going to be blowing that day, and like our streets are so narrow and crowded. Like I want people working together to know what the plan is versus chaos in the streets, trying to have everyone around here get out to Sir Francis Drake or wherever you would go.
I'd like to pick up on what you're saying. I was talking about changes in thinking, and it's very easy for us to think that, well, fire is a concern, but we need to have a fire extinguisher and not smoke in bed. But it's not like that anymore, because these wildfires can consume urban areas, and we need to think about it not just as people who live in houses, but as people who live in communities. Because the conditions that will affect us affect our neighbors, so we have to get to know our neighbors. When I did a screening in Santa Rosa recently, or actually Sonoma, commemorating the wine country wildfires, there was a firefighter who said 44 lives were lost in those wine country wildfires, but 9,000 structures burned. And the extraordinary thing is that only 44 lives were lost. That's because, and I interviewed some of these people, people went from door to door when they themselves were under danger. They knew who was vulnerable, who needed help getting out. So there was this community spirit, understanding that everyone had a shared fate. And so this phenomenon we often have in our society, in which we live in our own personal silos and don't know our neighbors, I think we need to evolve beyond that, especially in these fire-prone areas. I think it will benefit our lives in many ways and also make us safer.
And it might be fun. You might like your neighbors. You never know.
And I think part of this is with the call to action, then comes, how do we pay for it? You know, how are we going to create these structures? How are we going to get things together? So maybe any of you could talk about how do we balance these costs? How do we balance the cost of fire response efforts and fire management efforts, both immediate and in the future?
If you're a homeowner in Marin, and you live in Marin Municipal Water District service area, you're already paying for it. So on your property tax, there's a parcel fee, not a tax, that pays for fire flow to get water to the ridge top. So that's in the capital improvement program. And then there's on your water bill, there's a watershed fee, a flat fee that comes every month. And that pays for taking care of the watershed, all the things that the water district group does, but is one of our biggest investments, and that investment is going up. And so I'm sorry, your water bill is probably going to go up too. But it's in vegetation management. So we do fuel breaks on the perimeter of the community to reduce the risk of a fire coming off the mountain, coming into your homes, or the other way from that fire that starts in a neighborhood and going up into the watershed and doing damage to our watershed lands. So those are things that you're already paying for. There is, throw my Fire Safe Marin hat. Congratulations, Deer Park is getting organized. And it really starts, though, with the individual. You pay at your home to make your house, you do your defensible space, you reduce the ignitability of your home, and then be ready to evacuate. Who knows about Alert Marin? Who signed up for that? Excellent. And Nixle, that's it. Alert Marin's probably your highest priority because that's the call that's going to say, get up and get out. So I want everybody, go to firesafemarin.org. That's a one-stop shop for everything you want to know about community and personal safety for your home. That's a great resource.
Yeah, a couple things. I see there's a number below here in the audience. I mean, I'll just reiterate that you're responsible for your own house and curtilage. I mean, state law is maintain 100 feet of defensible space, but the thing that gets overlooked a lot is, if your house is the fuel source, then, whatever we do out in the wildlands is not going to make any difference. If your house is going to get, ignited by the first ember that falls on it, you need to deal with that. I'll just also give a shout out to the sort of FireWise program that the state's going to have a lot of grant money available over the next at least 5 or 6 years, $165 million a year or more. And a lot of that is, FireWise communities and those that have a similar sort of umbrella program for the community go to the front of the line for a lot of that. So to the extent that communities are getting it together collectively, that should also make more resources available.
And I'll say, speaking for land management agencies, I got two hats here, but there is a lot more collaboration with neighborhood groups, and Fire Safe Marin is fostering that. And once you get to the level where you're looking beyond your own house and beyond your neighborhood and looking at more regional solutions addressing vegetation management, there is funding for that. And there are professionals that can help with neighborhood organizations to develop action plans and fund the work on the ground. So that's, as you said, there's more money that's going to be hitting the ground.
Let's take this moment to open up to some questions.
I'd be interested in the panel's opinion of how to have a programmatic approach to dealing with fuel loads in our open space areas. I understand it's going to take money and you're going to have to set priorities and the rest, but what is the step-by-step program that we need in order to deal with fuel load?
Well, I would put that back to this gentleman's dichotomy of fuel loading as a risk to the community and to our lives and our homes versus fuel loading and how it behaves out on the wildlands. And
the latter particularly.
Yeah, so that fuel loads may not be feasibly reduced for all vegetation types, so it's really about choosing what kinds of habitats that could use intervention and create healthier habitat, but also less likelihood of destructive fires. So, you know, that's sort of been the focus for our vegetation management plan, is first to look at where we want to reduce fuels to protect communities, and then look at where we can do physical interventions, mostly in forested areas, where we can have benefit. The cost of doing that kind of work is extraordinary if there's no commodity extraction, and that's pretty much how it works for us. We're not harvesting timber, so we're having to remove fuels in the understory of forests, and we're looking at costs upwards of 10,000 acres. We're learning to drive that down, but we're using heavy equipment to do this initial investment of reducing fuels. We're also seeing benefits for water yield and probably carbon sequestration by reducing putting the growth on the bigger trees and removing the shrubs. But the scale of that work is really large and the investment's huge. So I think that programmatically we have areas where we've identified where we can do work. For us, is scaling up and getting the investment to be able to do that. So,
have you ever projected out, if you did what you're doing now, how long would it take to get where you want to be? I mean, is it a job that would not end? Is it 50 years?
It would never end. But there is like if you look at what the healthiest condition would be, what if fires came every 10 years like it used to when the Native Americans were burning? Well, we've missed so many cycles. There has to be some intervention that like I said, we just can't put fire back on the ground again. So there has to be some manipulations in some fashion to get back to that condition. That's like the capital investment. And then maintenance of the lands over time is it's a maintenance activity. So you have to come back at some interval. The fire scar history on Bolinas Ridge, where the second growth redwood forest is, it's, like I said, 8 to 13 years. The fire came back every year and recorded itself on a live tree and left a fire scar, so we have that in the fire ring history. But across that whole landscape, there was a fire recorded every single year. And not every fire recorded a fire scar, so that's a ton of burning. Can we sustain that as a community, that much smoke on the ground, that much investment to have crews out to manage it safely? Back in the day, it was just small villages, and they were cleared and they were safe. So now we have, and then the smoke from the prescribed burnings that we might do, we intend to invest in that, but it may not be a panacea.
But it's the tax that's on us now as a district. It's not going to do it. We need something else.
Well, there's a big bond act that floated some money for watershed investments in forests, but most of that's money is going to Sierra Nevada.
Well, I mean, the one on Tuesday failed. You think it was
that's process
from June. Yeah, I mean, but you're exactly right. I mean, you start looking at the scale of the challenge statewide, and we are so far. We have decades of fire suppression has gotten us way out of how frequently we would have burned. We used to burn 4 or 5 million acres a year in California, 200 years ago. Now we hit a million acres, and granted, those are in burns of a different sort of character than they might have been 200 years ago, but we still have a lot less burning happening than we used to. Trying to get back, close that gap so we're burning enough to be maintaining a healthier landscape, we are nowhere near the capacity to do that we need to be. And it's going to be one of the big challenges, I think, for resource management, state policy for the next 5 years, figuring out how do we go from, I think we did 3,000 acres of prescribed fire 2 years ago, statewide, on non-federal lands. And we might have gotten to 15,000 acres this calendar year. And, we're talking about getting to 60,000 acres, like that's going to be, aces. But, we...
National parks. What kind of...
They're doing a lot of things, but I think for all the partner agencies of OneTAM, fire management and fuels reduction are kind of a core business thing. OneTAM is really to create, get things done that we couldn't ordinarily do for habitat and for public education and trails and that sort of thing. But it's part of the core business. There is now a community wildfire protection plan for Marin County that was published in 2016. So that involved collaboration of all the land management agencies, fire service, different fire departments and county fire. So that's sort of the template that provides where we're doing fuels reductions for community protection. So again, we get to
and
that.
There are different monies that would provide for each.
And that provides the basis for applying for grant dollars. You have to have a community-wide protection plan in place so that the funding agencies can identify that you've done your homework and provided that. But that doesn't address all of the fuel load across all of the landscape. We still have fire risk. The risk of a catastrophic fire is real in Marin County. And we have lots of historic fires where they're burned across most of the landscape under the same kind of offshore winds, the high pressure system set up with the low humidity and the high winds that we're experiencing right now. And they burned, there's a fire in 1923 that burned from Ignacio all across, across Big Rock, across Loma Alta, burned right up to the edge of Fairfax. In 1945, there was a 20,000 acre fire that started near where Kent Dam is, and burned up and over Bolinas Ridge, up the north slope of Mount Tam, and also came to Sky Oaks above Fairfax. We right up to the edge, and what saved the towns was that the wind event stopped, and the fire came out of the trees and they were able to suppress it. So that's a real condition that we still face, and the kinds of channeled winds that happened in Sonoma County where the Tubbs fire came through. There's history there in that same location, that same footprint. We don't quite have that same velocity of winds that show up in the north, Napa and Sonoma Hills, but we still have history here where there's a risk of a catastrophic fire that can come down out of the hills. Burned down. The 1929 fire in Mill Valley burned 120 homes, and that same footprint of fire would be an ugly scene today. So we still face that risk.
And just an observation that I don't think came out in the movie is that fire behavior is almost entirely driven by your surface and ladder fuels. You will not typically get a crown fire that's just carrying itself unless you have just crazy wind conditions like we did in the wine country fires. Under those sort of conditions, nothing was going to make a difference. Everything was going to burn. All you can do is get out of the way. But in terms of changing fire behavior, it's your surface and ladder fuels that most of the time is going to make the difference in how a fire behaves. That, and the other thing that gets overlooked a lot is, at a certain point, it's a structure fire. And it's a structure fire that happens to be happening in a forest and landscape. I suspect that in many of the neighborhoods around here, that's the sort of situation. 15 years ago, there was a a fire up in South Lake Tahoe, the Angora fire, that burned, you know, from the sort of wildland area down into a populated part of town. And, you know, you look afterwards and there's all, you know, 100 homes burned, the trees are still there. There's still green top trees, and they were burning structure to structure, because that's what that became the fuel source.
Well, first off, thanks y'all for showing up and like bringing your varied perspectives and backgrounds, expertise. So in the film and in this conversation, we've talked a lot about changing fire regimes. Like, to my knowledge, we don't know what a pre-human fire regime looked like, because as long as humans have been on the landscape of California, there has been fire management, like many, many thousands of years, right? So then rewind a couple hundred years to European contact and this very abrupt change in landscape management from a fire perspective that was simultaneous with a really significant change in vegetative communities, right? Introductions of these new species that aren't fire-involved or fire adapted. We see it a ton, you know, out in West Marin or grasses. So my question is this: talk a lot about pre-fire landscape management and then prescribed burns like during the fire and that kind of landscape management, but what kind of work is being done afterwards? Like, you go kick around and where the rimfire is and it's all cheatgrass. There are all these grasses and species that are like setting us up for the next big burn. So I'm wondering about looking beyond the big fires. Like, we're gonna keep having these like quote unquote catastrophic fires where afterwards there is like monocrops of pines, tons of grasses that aren't fire dependent. So what work's being done for managing those landscapes that we're like gaining more and more of? Does that make sense?
The post-burn landscapes.
Yeah, like that's
yeah. Well, that's a matter of controversy, and we covered that, but didn't put it in the film. We wanted to confine the film to an hour, but they're all, and it really depends on what kind of management agency, or whether it's private lands. You saw a scene in which that tree planting scene above Buck Meadows, which was part of the rimfire burn area. And what we didn't bring out in the film is that those trees were being planted about as closely together as the forest that burned in the rimfire. Because silviculture, you know, the forest industry still controls what the Forest Service does. So for a while in the script, I had the narrator wonder whether they were growing the next replacement forest or fuel for the next mega fire. On the other hand, Yosemite is able to have regular burning, and in fact, the areas that burn prior to the rim fire did not burn severely at all when the rim fire entered Yosemite. And similarly, this happened again this year with the Ferguson fire. Areas that had burned, whether prescribed or managed natural fires in Yosemite, stopped severe effects of the Ferguson fire, which was heavily vegetated area right near Yosemite. And then, of course, private lands are a different story as well. So it's really complicated. It's also different according to the different ecologies of an area. One of the things that we find in these arguments about what to do after fires is that people generalize from one part of the state or one part of the West to another. But a fundamental idea of ecology is that each ecosystem is different, has different topography, different vegetation. So people will sound like scientists saying, well, in this study, such and such is the case. But really, you have to look at the fire regime, the topography, the vegetation, the fire history, to understand what to do in the wake of a fire.
In general, I think you could expect that those grassland areas we're talking about, or where the grasses came up first, will be eventually replaced by shrubs. Shrubs will grow higher and higher, and they'll create conditions where shade tar and seedling trees can be established, and then the forest that might take.
Assuming that there's not another fire.
Yeah, even sometimes if there is another fire. In fact, a lot of times high severity burns burn again at high severity fairly quickly afterwards. And I think whether that was the case 1,000 years ago, you're right in saying we don't necessarily know, but I think it's pretty safe to assume that the general progression of fire, creating shrub habitat turning to forest, and then burning again has been going on there for a long time. And I have some information that we put out about, from the bird perspective, what you can do post-fire, and some guidelines that we'd like to promote. So we'll find out.
You mentioned private lands there briefly. Has there ever been any studies to these timber company like a Weyerhaeuser or an MRC who's been managing their timber for 75, 80 years, have had less intense fires on that that's been thinned or you clear cut in areas that are breaking up, you know, the fuels and that sort of thing, versus such a magnitude for the Forest Service is a different animal. Have the private lands been any different?
I think that a lot of the large private landowners, you know, Sierra Pacific Industries over in the Sierra, for instance, they own, you know, 1.5 million, 2 million acres, and they've been doing a lot of sort of plantation management over the last 30 years or so. So they've got a lot of stuff that's all young, dense, even aged, and burning up like crazy in these fires. I mean, just like explosive. That's a lot of what burns in the rim fire. And I think it's forcing some hard internal conversations. Like, okay, so when we started out on this plan, this business model of, you know, buying up a whole bunch of land and doing a whole bunch of dense plantations, we weren't planning for climate change or significant changes in how fires are behaving in California. And, you know, I think they're really struggling with how to avoid extreme losses to their, you know, bottom line. They haven't really changed their management yet, but I think my hunch is that that's coming. They're going to probably try to accelerate getting to a little more fire resilient condition a little faster.
We're going to save some questions for the end. I'd just like to thank everyone for coming out. I think one of my favorite quotes from the movie is that we learn something from every fire. So I'm hoping that we all had something to learn here today and have some great takeaways. Let's give a big round of applause.